welcome to another episode of Never Seen a Film Club, the film club where we watch films that you've never seen. I'm Accidental Theatre's Emy Bainbridge, and joining me, as always, on this dank, horrible, it's not really, it's really sunny, and it's a good thing too, because he looks really good in the sun. It's the handsome Robert J. Simpson from City Punked.
Hello. I don't know what that was. It's been a long day, what can I say?
It's long. It's long and down to get the friction on like the teenagers in this film.
Oh yeah.
We're back. So this is our concluding film of our sex positivity season, which
Was that what it's called? I've been calling it the sexy season.
Sexy, sex positivity, as long as you're not sex negative or slut shamey, we don't care what you want to call it. It's the sex season. Where we've actually shown some of my favourite films. I don't know what that says about me. Anyway, this is our concluding film, and it is Y Tu Mamá También from 2001.
Sándwich de cuates, mal movimiento y te llueven mecates. Pacto de sangre, parcha a su novia, también a su madre. Se dice que son los charolastras, ladillas, gandallas, manchados y lacras. Las dan más chidas, la banda para arriba. You don't know what it's like. You don't know what it's like to love somebody, the way I love you. To love somebody the way that I love you.
Una mañana los soldados tiburones me condujeron a la corte de Neptuno. Se me acusaba que en un viernes de dolores a la sirena me comí en el desayuno. Como ninguno me creyera, me mandaron fusilar. Cuando aparece mi sirena y cuenta toda la verdad.
This is an interesting one because I think it's our second foreign language film of the season. First one was French, this one is Spanish, but the film is Mexican, which can be a little tricky sometimes culturally, with little differences that happen and you have to pay attention. But I think that this might be one of my favourite films of all time.
Ooh.
Yeah, I have a real soft spot for this film. Came out in 2001. It is essentially another coming of age film, which I think we've had a couple in this season. We tried really hard not to have too many because it's really easy when you're talking about sex to make everything coming of age. But I think comparing last week's coming of age film, which was Cruel Intentions, don't trigger us, please. This one is nuanced and intriguing, and also
It has willies!
and that's why Robert is off the podcast. No. It is sophisticated and European in style.
This is our first film with willies I think we've shown in any of the programs.
I do think you're correct. I do think that in our sex positivity season, this is the first time there is a willy on screen.
I think it's our first Never Seen a Film Club film with willies. I've definitely seen some boobies and some bush and some no bush. We've had a lot of fanny, but I don't think we've had any cock.
I'm trying to think now. Insert montage of me just looking for penises in films.
It's good. I'm thinking about all the graphics we've seen in Showgirls and the likes of that, and there's been a lot of female bodies on display. This, I feel, is the first time I've actually had something that's balanced it up properly. And I'm not including the room. Tommy Wiseau's back does not count, and him fucking a belly button doesn't. Well, there's a bit of that in this too.
Input. You're very excited by the male genitalia in the film, Robert. Why don't you tell us more about that? As I grab the microphone stand. Yeah.
Let me just take.
Okay.
Look, I mean, it's a very obvious thing I think to focus on, but I think I'm reminded watching this about the way that a lot of cinema represents the human body, and the way that the gaze. I've said that wrong. The gaze rather than the gaze. It's been a long day.
The gaze, not the gaze.
But
Or maybe the gaze. Not
this
the gaze.
this idea that we look through things in a particular way and that it's geared towards certain audiences, and a lot of it is geared towards apparently heterosexual male view, and so that's why we have this abundance of female forms that are on display. Men's bodies are largely held back. And on the rare occasion that we do see them, it tends to be very flaccid. Partly because there have been censorship rules about this for a very long time around what we can and can't see. So that there's a film that is so open about male bodies that allows us to see them, and it's not particularly graphic. To be fair, it's still held within a certain amount of restraint, but it's unusual because of that. There are cocks on display. Cassian Andor's cock is on display, which is quite a shock for Disney.
But that in The Mandalorian. It's not The Mandalorian. I know.
Don't put his cock in The Mandalorian. That's very inappropriate.
You have to ask The Mandalorian first.
That's never making the cut.
I don't think it is. Pedro Pascal would be into that, but I don't think the cut of this would be.
But yeah, no, it is not something that you tend to see within mainstream cinema, and even within art house cinema, it's not something that you see that often. So when it is there, it's a bit of a surprise.
I'd agree. I think there has always been a fear of showing male genitalia in film in general. Mainly, I think, because actors are scared of having their willies out. This is why I love Kevin Bacon. I will have a soft spot in my heart for Kevin Bacon forever, because he said more willies now. He's done so much full frontal male nudity, and that's why he's like, we are constantly seeing women naked all the time on screen. He's like, guys, let's just do it. We're just human beings, man. I'm like, Kevin Bacon, you're right. You're 100% right. There is just this inherent fear of that area of the male body. And I think in large part it is just because it's the only taboo left in terms of the male body, because men can walk around with their shirts off. We see that.
I saw one on the way here today.
Caps off weather.
Painting his fence.
Yeah. So there's no taboo there. Men constantly have their arses out. Lads, you know what I'm talking about. You always do. It's the first thing you want to do when you're funny and you turn around and you get your hole out. I don't want to be seeing that either. But again, the back of a human being, the bum is not taboo anymore. And it's not viewed as sexual. So therefore, the only thing that men have that they can guard secretly is their wee willies. And personally, I think it is time that they just whip them out. I do think there is now a culture in filmmaking. This is a very long-winded conversation about penis, but
things you never thought you'd hear Emma say.
Well, I'm a very round individual when it comes to sexuality, but depicting, Anyway, I think there has been an open, like, this conversation has been going on for years in Hollywood about why we're so afraid of even flaccid penises, which I don't get the hype, because it's just the human body. It's just part of the form, but it's just so interesting that when it is happening, it's, as you said, used for shock. It's used for, like, it's still used for jokes a lot of the time. Like, come on now, how many times have we seen, like, prosthetic penises used in film and all the rest of it? Whereas this film treats it as just I think because the whole film is done like it's shot kind of with handhelds and that kind of faux documentarian style. So it's just very blasé with it. It's not used in a shock manner. It's just like, this is, you're watching people exist as people. And whether we like it or not, guys, men exist and some of them have penises. So I think we're seeing now definitely more of a liberation of the penis in filmmaking, because I think people have accepted that it's not even in a female gaze kind of a way, because I think the female gaze and the male gaze, like, it's a very nuanced conversation, but if we're using the very basic way of it, women don't really care about that kind of thing. Men are traditionally very driven by nudity and very driven by bodies, gay, straight, or whatever. But I think in this film, it is just because it is done in kind of a faux documentarian kind of feel, where it's handheld cameras and you're made to feel like you're very voyeuristic. I think you as the viewer, you're kind of in the world of the narrator of the film, where you're this omnipresent being. So as an omnipresent being, you would see some naked men if they were doing naked men things. And it's not done in a titillizing shock value way. It is just done in a natural, this is a side of sexuality way. And in particular, I think that scene, I think we all know what scene we're talking about if you've seen this film, the diving board scene. In particular, how many times have we heard the phrase soggy biscuit in this country? Soggy biscuit is a thing that exists. Boys be jacking off together. I hate to break the fourth wall, guys. You'll be jerking off together when you're teenagers. It's a weird thing that happens because hormones are weird and they make you do strange things. But the diving board scene, I think, in particular, it just is done in such a beautiful way that you're watching it and you're like, you're not aware of the act itself. You're aware of like just the impulsivity of youth in that moment, where you're like, there is always there's like an undertone of, I wouldn't say homosexuality, but there is definitely a exploration-y type thing, where I've heard plenty of stories of boys being like, you know, I never have done anything with a guy, or I've never, you know, but when I was younger, I had this one friend and we would talk about things and then things would happen and that kind of thing. And I think that's where this comes from, is that the impulsivity and the exploration of youth. That's my 2 cents.
It certainly feels that that's the sort of, that would fit with the arc that they go on in terms of their relationship. I think there is definitely, though, a homoerotic, I don't even know what to say if it's an undertone, because it's it's just very
tone.
obvious.
Yeah.
There's definitely a lot of homoeroticism within this, and I think that is also pretty typical of all male environments, and that's kind of what they seem to surround themselves with. I've only heard legend of Sticky Biscuit myself. I've never participated.
Just giant disclaimer at the bottom of the screen. Robert has never participated.
I've never participated in Sticky Biscuit. I've heard stories. I remember them talking about when I was at school.
Yeah.
I did hear other stories that about, you know, some of my classmates whacking each other off. So I mean, it definitely happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think they would have necessarily seen themselves as gay. And I dare say they probably still wouldn't see themselves as gay. I mean, this is something that we accept much more with women. Mm-hmm. It's something that we still seem to find difficult to accept with men in society. So there's a lot of denial around it. And what's interesting about this is it allows them to have that exploration. And it is that fine line. I think it was when we were talking about cool intentions, you said something about how, you know, there's just that it's hormones. Mm-hmm. Like stuff is raging. People are just exploring and they're just engaging and doing stuff. And there's an element of that here, but also that kind of shared experience that they're having, those kind of moments of very intimate friendship, diving boards in particular. It does feel that the point at which they reach is inevitable.
Yeah.
You know, that proximity, that closeness, that sharing of spaces and desires, which centers around the desire to fuck one woman. You know, the both of them have the same intent. Let's take her away. Let's have sex with her. They clearly haven't had a conversation about well, we're going to do it one at a time, one after another, or is it going to be together? But that in itself is setting itself up for a thing. And it is, I mean, I've been curious about this film for ever since it was released. This is a film that I have never seen before. And I think because I didn't know enough about it, it surprised me. I mean, it opens on a scene of very vigorous adolescent sex. It's not very good adolescent sex, but you're an adolescent. You're allowed to make mistakes and learn. And that kind of raw desire is I mean, it's hilarious, it's amusing, it's funny, but it's also quite refreshing to see, and it's quite honest.
Yeah.
There's early sex scenes, but it also sets the film up. Like, my expectation was then that this is going to be a very sexy film with lots and lots of sex, and actually there's not that much. I think there's 1, 2, including the masturbation.
I think there's
5. Is it?
Yeah,
5. 1, 2, 3,
4 or
4,
5.
5. 6, maybe 6 scenes of sex within the film.
Yeah.
Which is quite a lot, because most films, mainstream cinema, they gear themselves up around 1 sex scene. And it's not, none of these scenes are really traditional sex scenes either.
Oh, for sure. Like even the opening, as you said, it is that vigorous kind of schoolboy. Neither of you know what you're doing. You're just going fast and hoping for the best because it feels good to like be naked with somebody else for like kind of probably the first few times of your relationship. It's not this like, it's not the tender kind of losing your virginity scenes that we get in traditional coming of age films. It's not the behind closed doors kind of implied things that you get in a lot of teenage rom-coms. It's very open and honest and very raw and very uncomfortable to watch. Like when you sit down, you're like, right, cool, eat to Mamá También. I've heard this is a great film. Okay. And it goes on for quite a long time in cinema terms, not in terms of the sex terms, but that's another story. But like
I've definitely lasted longer.
It's like, what, a good 2 or 3 minutes? Bragging over here. Some of us have stamina. Robert just rubbing it in. 3 minutes. But it is an uncomfortably long time to be watching 2 young people have sex at the start of a film.
Well, it's not even just that, though. I mean, it's the conversation that goes on around that sequence as well, whereas it feels like a very controlling, like, oh, so we're going to be apart for the summer. You're not going to have sex with this, and then run off a list. And I mean, the warnings. I mean, it's sort of signposting information that's to come later, but it goes in a direction later on that I didn't quite expect it to. To be fair, but yeah, there's an element of that controlling behavior that instantly makes me feel, oh, this is not good. But also, you're teenagers, and this is exactly what teenagers do, because we all think that everything is the most important thing that's ever happened because we have no life experience.
Yeah, and it all feels so close and so like in the moment, so intense, and you're like, nothing is ever going to be this intense ever again. I have to have full control. Like, you're not going to break up with me, you're not going to do this. I am your only. Like, even if I'm not your, like, even if I as a male protagonist can go off and do whatever I want because that's what society expects of me, because I am your sexual partner, you're not going to do this because that's the ultimate betrayal. And it's just the first indicator about how unsustainable their relationships are within this film, which I think ultimately is what this film is about. It's like, sometimes you have these really intense, really close relationships in your youth, but as you grow up, you will leave them behind. And I think, hiya, if you're watching this, you know who you are if you've seen it. I've had that kind of intense relationship with somebody that ended just as abruptly, and I've not seen that person since, and it's been 20 years now.
Yeah.
And it happens. And I think what's so beautiful about this film is that it's not a punishment for either party involved. It's just, this is what life is. It's like life will happen regardless of your attempts to control it. You're not controlling anything. And I think that's what's so lovely about those little moments with the narrator that pay attention to what's happening in the background. For instance, when they're driving past and they see the body in the street, and it's like, well, that was just a construction worker trying to go home, like trying to get to work. He skipped going the long way today because something happened, so he went this way, and ultimately this is what happens. And that's kind of, those little moments happen within the film of just being like, you can try and control all you want, but ultimately you are not around for your own purpose.
There's something kind of depressingly fatalistic as well about a lot of those other stories. Like they're not stories that are filled with lots of hope and positivity. They are encounters with people who have died or are going to die, or whose fortunes are going to be thwarted somehow. And that again also feels like a very realistic way of dealing with life, is that no matter what goes on, is that, you know, life is inevitably filled with sadness. And that's a nice, I think that makes for a good contrast to the joy of the experience that they're going through, and the kind of this really intense, weird emotional space that they seem to be in. I mean, they're a very intense pair of boys. Very intense. They're fired up on everything. And it's not just because they're taking a lot of illicit substances. That's obviously helping, but they are quite fired up and anyway, and they seem to get a thrill out of each other. What I like about this, compared to Cruel Intentions, is that actually we do have a class thing going on here. So there is a tension that's inherent there, and we do get an insight into that and how they both perceive each other. And it's an underlying thing. It's like in a way that they can transgress that you know, they're not worried about that class thing most of the time, but it's there as an unspoken.
Yeah.
And they both have their own feelings about the other that are not necessarily so wonderfully endorsing.
So there's a moment where Tanak's talking about, he goes to the bathroom and he uses his foot to raise the lid. And then the narrator comes in and points out that there's this unspoken thing where when Julio's in Tanak's house, he always lights matches because he hates the smell of the house. But when Tanak's in Julio's house, he never uses his hands to lift the lid of the toilet because Julio's of a lower class than him. And the classism is so beautifully nuanced throughout this film. As you said, they never talk about it explicitly, but there's little moments where it rears its ugly head. And I think that's also what's nice about the setting of the film, because it's set obviously during a time of upset and change within Mexico itself as a country, where the party that had been in charge for I think 70 years loses the election for the first time. And that's kind of like the old money situation being unsettled. And then you had this influx of American wealth coming in and building resorts and kind of ruining these kind of more rural communities, which you get a little bit where you see the fisherman's family, again, a little voiceover explains that a resort opens up and he has to become a janitor and he never fishes again because he can't get the permits because the tourists are there now. I think little things like that are just hints about, you know, when you're small and you're a child, class doesn't necessarily bother you. But as soon as you become a teenager and you become aware of the world, and that is a slow-growing seed, that can sometimes be the straw that breaks the camel's back in your relationships with people, depending on what side of the divide you're on, because ultimately you will not be able to understand each other. And I think that's hinted at a little bit with the ending of this film as well.
Yeah, I mean, there are moments where we get insights into both worlds, and both our kind of protagonists manage to move fairly seamlessly between the two worlds. We do see the weirdness of a big Mexican wedding where the president of the country is there, and the wealth and that's associated with that. And that sits in contrast to their driving through rural Mexico, and often street scenes that are quite dirty and litter strewn. So there is this definite kind of, it feels like poverty is there, but they have I mean, at least two members of that car journey seem to have wealth, and yet they don't feel like they don't belong. Like that, I think that's the thing, is that everyone feels like they belong in those spaces, and the class is an underlying tension that's quite separate from the sexuality that's explored. Like, I don't think the class dictates the sex.
No, I would
Whereas
agree with that.
I think it does in Cruel Intentions.
Yeah.
I think.
And Belle de Jour.
Belle de Jour, yeah.
As well. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think for me, all three members of the party are separated from everything that they see because they're in. It's almost like the car is a little bubble, and they're seeing things. It's like, it's not that they don't belong, but they are definitely removed from the situation, including Julio, who's the more working class one in that situation. But because those three are on a different, like, they seem to be on a different journey to the rest of the country at that point, because their whole ambition is just to get to this beach and have sex with this woman, and the rest of the country is kind of in disarray. And again, Louisa in this film, her storyline is so heartbreaking when you because again, you initially watch it and you're like, what is her motivation here? And you're like, okay, so your husband's a dick, but you know, everyone has doesn't seem to be big enough motivation to uproot your life and go on this like foray with these teenagers you barely know. I think they could be serial killer, who knows? But then you discover why. And again, spoiler alert for a film that's 22 years old, but we'll put one in anyway. But then at the end, when you discover that, oh, it's because she has so little life left. Like, she has terminal cancer. She's not going to get better. She's trying to observe as much life as she can. And she's kind of using the youth of these two boys as an excuse to do that. Because she kind of uses them as not as avatars, that would be too much, but she kind of uses their journey and their youthful vibrance to kind of push herself. But you catch her in these lovely moments where she is just observing, and she wants to talk to people. And I think that to me becomes less of a it's very obvious I think when you first watch it and before you get to that conclusion, you're like, oh, so this is just the rich girl like cosplaying being a villager and doing that whole thing that I've heard middle class girls like to do, where they go to a different country and like are like, you know, I spent time with these orphan children in Uganda and now I feel better and they feel better and blah 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 blah. And I kind of got that impression of her initially. I thought that's what the point was, is that, you know, she's just seeing this other world. She belongs in the country, but she is definitely kind of looking down. But then you realize she's not looking down. She's just trying to observe as much life as she can before hers is over. And then I think that perspective kind of gets forced onto the boys towards the end of the road trip. Not initially, because obviously they've got one-track minds and, you know, they're not really observant at all. But yeah, I think the classism is definitely plays a big role in their relationship for sure, and is one of the reasons that ultimately at the end, again, spoiler, you get this lovely moment where they go for that coffee and the narrator comes back and says they never see each other again. And it's just because they are from different worlds. They don't coexist anymore because life is complicated and complex.
Ooh.
And sex and there's like sex and exploration is not enough to sustain their relationship beyond it, because ultimately they're both too selfish to care about each other because other things happen that they're more concerned with.
I see it slightly differently.
Controversial.
So I think the point about her doing other things with the boys or you know, her being more involved, I think it's also a reflection of her maturity. That she has those, you know, a handful of years on them, but at that point they're still very much in the mind space of play. Everything that they do is a form of play. sex is a form of play. It's a sport. You know, you see them like playing football. They're racing each other. It's that kind of fun, full of life. It's doing everything else. They're constantly moving forward, and they're not taking time to consider themselves. Absolutely. She, on the other hand, has that, and I think part of the reason that she goes with them is because of that opportunity to play again. It's an opportunity to capture a little bit of youth at a point where, as you say, you know, her days are numbered. And you know, she's got a choice. I mean, she can either stay in the marriage that she's in, where he's cheating anyway on a regular basis, where, you know, she's at a point, at a real crossroads there, and is that how she wants to end her days? Or, you know, could you go and just have a bit of fun and remember what it's like to be young again? But while she's doing that, I think because she's not entirely a child, she has this moment. She's allowed to break down, allowed to feel deep emotion, allowed to cry. The boys feel emotion too, but they're not yet ready to handle what that actually means. And they're seeing it as simple black and white betrayal, because the boys still see everything in black and white. They're also hypocritical to the masses, you know, like these, you know, they're annoyed at each other for sleeping with each other's girlfriends.
Yeah, which is one of my
Like, you've neutralized the problem. You've both been doing it. You really just need to wise up, and you can't be annoyed at each other for sleeping with her either, because, I mean, sleeping's not really the right term for a quick in and out, really. You know, so that again is sort of, but I think the reason that they drift apart, I think, is probably more to do with embarrassment and shame at the homosexual encounter that they have with each other. Now, yes, it's just part of a threesome. A threesome which I have to say is very disappointing. Starts off with a lot of promise, this three-way. You know, it's set up quite nicely. The three of them are there, and there's the start of some action, and then we see them kiss, and then it cuts away. And I feel that for a film that's quite open about its sex, that is maybe a disappointment, but also I understand that there were a lot of issues with censorship within the film anyway, and they had a battle to try and get it in front of audiences. And maybe that would have been a step too far because for cinema at that time. But I think that I mean, because when they wake up the next morning, there is a very clear shame. We're not going to talk about this at all. And it's clear that we see them kiss, and it's pretty clear that other things happen.
Yeah.
And I think that's what puts the wedge in the relationship more than anything else, because they've been kind of making amends for everything else up until that point, and then they don't really want to talk, because a conversation is going to take them back to that point where they have, in what is still a Catholic society,
Fair.
where they're going to have to address the fact that, you know, they had a homosexual encounter and they're not ready for that, and they're not in a society that's massively keen on that. They have one gay friend who's a queen, and you know, that's fine, but they don't address themselves within that same space, you know. And I think that's the point where when they reach each other, the last major thing that they did was probably fuck each other. And it's like, you know, if you have a one night stand with someone that maybe you know, and maybe you shouldn't have done that, there still has to be some kind of conversation and addressing of that. Otherwise, it becomes a thing that you can't move past. And I think that's what they have done in their ignorance of youth, is that they've had a moment that was probably quite meaningful in some respects. There was definitely seismic. Even though they're busy wanking off in front of each other, this is a seismic, you know.
That's not gay, because you're touching each other. You're touching yourself, not each other.
Yeah, but I still think it's homoerotic. But the point is,
is.
This is clearly a physical touching of the two, and I think that's a step too far. And I think that it's a conversation that they can't have it.
That's the thing, I think, especially with these kind of male, because I think ultimately, as we said earlier in the conversation, I think it happens a lot more than people will let on. This kind of dalliance with homosexual sex. I'm not saying that everyone's fucking left and right, but I'm like, I do believe that things happen, and I'm like, there I think is this tendency to think of teenage boys as nothing but hormones and raging hard-ons. But I'm like, but there are like guys, here's a shocking thing. Men do have emotions, and so do teenage boys. So I think there are sometimes the line does get crossed when you have a really, really close friendship. Doesn't matter if it's male, female, if you have a very close friendship, full stop, those lines can get blurred. And especially when you're young and you do have like the inexperience of youth and you're not used to those rushing kind of, you're like, oh, I feel this thing, so does that mean I have to do this thing? And it's like, okay, so we're emotionally intimate now. Does that mean that we have to be physically intimate? And it's like, oh, we've been physically intimate, but I don't want. And it's like, there are so many cross sections of what friendship can be, and those lines can get very blurry. And when you're young, it's hard to distinguish.
But I don't even think that. I mean, that I think is something that speaks to people of many ages. I don't think it's exclusive to teenagers either, because I think even as adults, people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever, we can all still have encounters with friends or people that we know better that maybe are ill-judged, or maybe, you know, it seemed like a good idea at the time. And the consequences of that afterwards, sometimes emotionally, people are not ready to go, and it can ruin friendships, it can ruin relationships, it can ruin workplaces, you know, wherever it is that you find your find your thing.
Yeah.
So when that happens, I mean, I don't think that's uncommon, and I don't think that, you know, I think we as people aren't always good at dealing with that, because I think as well there's this expectation that if you have something with somebody, especially if you know them, that means there's something more significant about it.
Yeah.
And that you aren't then allowed to go, do you know what, that was fun, I really enjoyed that, but I don't think we're going to do it again. But that's okay, because I still like you, but I just don't think we should.
Wait, people still like you after those things happen?
Sometimes.
Never. I just get ghosted.
I mean, that definitely has happened, the ghosting, you know, and then you kind of go, well, why? And I think it's that same issue, is that people are not emotionally in that space where they can deal with that.
I think that is a very true problem. I think what I meant is that it happens a lot more when you're, like, I think it does happen, especially in our society, within the teenagedom, because once you leave school, your excuses go and you have to become an adult. And for us, as still quite a religious society, 9 times out of 10, that means wife, child, house. No more dalliance, no more exploration of yourself as a person. You go to university, you get married, you have children, you die. And that's the pattern. So I think I've had conversations with many men in their 50s where they're like a little bit sad because they maybe did fall in love with that boy at school, or they did, you know, have feelings for somebody, and they were like, they did, or they didn't explore it sexually, but they're like, but my emotions were different, and they're like, I never felt that way about someone else again. And I feel like that's very much what we've seen on screen here, is that these two characters have had that moment, and they'll go off and, you know, they can fall in love, they can do it, but it'll never be that connection again, that intimacy, that journey that they've explored, because they've had together. They'll never experience it again. And in some ways, it's very sad, because you will spend the rest of your life wondering about that feeling, but also not being able to replicate it, good or bad.
Do you think, and there's a question I was asking myself last night watching this, that they would have reached that point of being intimate with each other had she not suggested it to them several times during the journey?
No. I think they would have potentially had drunken contact, but it would not have been intimate. I think they would have had, again, either dalliances with their girlfriends involved and used that as an excuse. Oh, we were having a threesome, so, you know, but no one ever talks about it. But I think it's the fact that Louisa provides a safe environment for them to be able to be like, okay, let's do it. Like, they use that, again, they do use her as an excuse of like, oh, it's a, you know, we're having a threesome, it's fine. But she has said, you know, throughout the whole journey, it's okay. So she gives them active permission, and you get the feeling that we know why she's not going to tell anybody, but they don't, but they trust her. So she's built up that trust by just putting her money where her mouth is, no pun intended. So I feel like I feel like if they had never met Louisa, I don't think it would have ever reached that point. I think it would have been a what if situation. But I also think that they would have continued to be friends if they hadn't. I think they would have pushed past well, maybe not for the rest of time, but I do think they would have been light acquaintances. I think their paths would have separated, but maybe not in a violently ended way where it is very abrupt. And that's it. There you go. All in all, life is like the surf. So let's give ourselves away to the sea. Oh, it's such a good quote. But I love that quote so much. But yes, I love this film. I saw it a long time ago and I've rewatched it and I enjoyed it just as much. I think it's definitely worth a watch if you are a person with emotions. If you're not, maybe not for you. If you're a sociopath, don't give it a watch. But I do have a soft spot for it. I think it's definitely a big jewel in the crown of contemporary Mexican cinema. I think it and Amores Perros are two standouts from like where Mexican cinema had like a renaissance in the early 2000s and now has like come up with some of the things that white people steal in Hollywood, but maybe not white people, but just men. But I do love this film an awful lot. And I thought it was a very nice conclusion to a very good season that we're very grateful that you guys picked. I love talking about sex positivity and sex films, so that's been good for me. Next season, not so much, because it's about an era of time where I wasn't born yet, so it's rubbish. Because there was no Emma in the world.
Bold statement.
So it's shit. No, I'm joking. But yes, thank you for joining us for this season. And we will be back very soon with our new season. If you would like to become a member of Never Seen It Film Club, details are in the description below. If you want to support Accidental Theatre, you can follow us or give us money, which is, both options. But you can follow us on all our social media at Accidental Theatre or Accidental T on Twitter. You can follow Robert and Cinepunkt, not in person, but online at the following things.
Oh, I'll take donations for personal following. You'll find me at either under my name or Avalard, and you'll find Cinepunkt at Cinepunkt or Cinepunkt Film. Just do a little bit of a Google. Google is your friend.
Just Google us.
Just Google us. Actually, that's the easiest thing to do.
Just Google us.
There's no links in whatever socials you're watching this on right now. Just Google us.
Give us a Google. There's only one of us. Anyway, bye!